You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Marc Matthews.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the Inside the Mix podcast. In this episode, I am very excited, as I always am, to welcome my guest today, my friend, FastEddy856, who is an independent music producer, writer, and artist. And he's joining me today for a Producer Kickstart Strategy Session. Hello, FastEddy. How are you? How are things going, buddy?
I'm good, Marc. How are you doing, man?
I'm all right. I'm good. We've been back and forth on Instagram for a while now, so it's good to finally chat via this medium that we find ourselves in today. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, so in the notes, in the lead up to this, you found the podcast because you were starting mixing and mastering, and you wanted to listen to an informative podcast about mixing,
yes,
which is also laid back and cool. And I love that description. I should add it as the tagline for the episodes or the podcast itself. Maybe if you could just tell our audience a little bit about your music production journey to date. What is it that has inspired you to start sort of this mixing production journey?
Well, I've been producing since I was 16 years old, so about 30 years. I'm giving my age away, but yeah, 30 years now. And I didn't have the funds really to keep on paying for somebody to mix and master, so I started figuring it out myself and learning myself. So that's why I started mixing and mastering.
It makes perfect sense, and you're certainly not alone with regards to that, and individuals taking it in-house to save funds, because being an independent artist and producer, obviously it does require financial outlay, and
yes.
You kind of need to weigh up, like, I want to do some of it myself, but at the same time we need to obviously see opportunities whereby we need to outsource. So you got to kind of weigh up where, if you've got that pot of money that you can invest in you as an artist and producer, you need to spend it wisely. So I totally get what you're saying with regards to bringing it in-house. So maybe if you could describe, well, I've got it written down here, your biggest pain point at the moment is doing mixes over and over again. So you're going through that iterative pattern of binge mixing, for want of a better way of putting it. So you're doing another mix and another mix and another, which, yes, my friend, you are not alone. There are many individuals that do this. I used to fall into this pattern as well. Maybe if you could tell us a bit more about that. What is it? And you mentioned about competing with yourself in the notes I've got here. What is it that you're competing with? What is it? What's driving you to do these multiple mixes?
I'm thinking I can do better, and then I go back to a mix I've done, and it didn't sound bad at all. And I'm like, what am I doing? So I believe I'm getting with the confidence is almost there, but I'm still lacking something in confidence. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, you're totally not. I keep saying this now. It's going to be a recurring theme of the episode here. You're not alone in that, and it's kind of like that imposter syndrome, isn't it? And I get this routinely with the podcast. When you look at other podcasts that are doing X, Y, Z, and they're all these numbers and stuff, and you cannot help but compare yourself to others and get that imposter syndrome and think, oh, if they're doing that, why doesn't mine sound like that? But I think you're right at the beginning of your journey here at the moment as well. Like, if you've only just started to dip your toe in the water, so to speak, of like mixing and mastering. And there's that classic sort of 10,000 hours, isn't there? I don't know if you've heard of that. You've got 10,000 hours of something to really, not necessarily even master it, but really get it and understand it and get it under your belt. So my sort of response to that is don't compare yourself to others, for one. I mean, it's hard to, it's easy for me to say that. It's really easy for me to sit here and say don't compare yourself to others, because we do, and social media is often the catalyst for that, and you cannot help but look for a feed and see what someone else is doing, but we're only seeing the positives generally, I think, with music, what people are portraying and putting out there. So that would be like the number one thing is straight away not to compare yourself to others. But with regards to the mixing iterations, I think a lot of the time, a lot of that falls down to sort of knowing the fundamentals of mixing itself. So things like EQ and dynamics processing and time-based processing like reverb and delay. And what I often say to individuals is, like, if you've got a select few plugins, is to know them very well, because it's quite easy to see that silver bullet plugin a lot of the time. And this happens with mixing. You got a mix, right? And you're thinking, oh man, it's just sounded really muddy in the low end, or my vocal just isn't sitting right. It's not present enough. And if I increase the level, then it stands out too, and it's too proud of the mix. Or if I don't, then I cannot hear it and it's not standing. And then you see this video, this advert on TV. I don't know, you may see it on TV, but you see it on YouTube, for example, and it's saying, oh man, tried this plugin and now my mix sounds absolutely bang and everything's X, Y, Z. And you can quite easily fall into that. So one thing I often say to individuals, and I particularly do this with coaching clients as well, is like, if you've got a select few plugins like an EQ, a compressor, a reverb, metering, is to get to know those ones really, really well and fully understand what they do before you start reaching for another plugin that you think might solve the issue. Because I think a lot of the issues sometimes arise, specifically right at the beginning of your sort of mixing and mastering journey, is you've got an issue, or you can identify it, but maybe you're not at the place whereby you know how to fix it. And I think knowing like an EQ, for example, in Logic, like the Logic EQ, knowing it inside out and what it can do before you move on to another one is highly important. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I believe I've been doing that recently. I've done what you said too. I've seen people say, use this, use that. And I've used it because they said it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stick with this first and learn this. And I've been doing that now. And it's been working for me.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing to do, because there are so many. And I fall into this trap, hands in the air. I think I did it earlier today, or it might have been yesterday. YouTube, I find, is the worst for this. That you'll put on a video and the first thing you'll see is an advert saying, this plugin has created this chord progression for me. It's out of this world. And I'm like, I don't want to see this right now, or something along those lines. So that would be my first step. And it's great that you're already doing that, is to really get to grips with the plugins and the tools that you have at hand. And Logic is fantastic.
I love
like
Logic.
with what it has. You're a Logic user, right? If I remember rightly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Logic.
Have you updated to Logic Pro 11?
Not yet. Well, I tried to, but my computer stops at 10 point, like the last one. So I think I need a new computer, a new Apple.
That's the problem, isn't it? Like Apple does that, man. It releases this update and it says, oh yeah, they've got this great update, stem splitter, chroma glow, but you need to have this first. And you're like, oh,
I heard so
really?
much about it.
Yeah.
I heard your stem splitter episode too. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's really good. Like
I heard the difference between when you split them up too. I was like, wow, okay.
It's quite impressive. Now, I think I said it in the episode. I haven't actually used other stem splitting applications, but maybe I'll go away and do that. But I was quite impressed. And I briefly looked at Chroma Glow yesterday and what that can do. And that looks quite exciting in turn. It's like a saturator, and it's got various different saturation parameters, let's say, and emulations in air quotes that you can use. And it looks pretty good from what I can see. So, and I'm also I want to have a look at the, there's is it AI, like a bass player sort of thing as well, for composition to generate those as well. Anyway, getting off track, but it looks really good. But Logic has some fantastic plugins native to it, like the EQ and the compressors. So I often say to individuals, like, before you go out and buy like the latest and greatest EQ or compressor, get to know those really well. And also, I think in particular with compression, is to actually understand the different parameters and what they do. I think is quite important as well, and actually be able to identify what they're doing when you do it, because I think it's quite easy when you start out to think, oh, I'm going to slap a compressor on it because that's what people do, without actually knowing what it's doing, which is a whole episode in itself. You could do a whole episode just on the attack setting of a compressor, right? But my next bit of advice for the mix iteration. So we've got the first one, which is to know a select few tools really, really well and get the fundamentals down in terms of understanding tonal balance with EQ and also dynamics processing in particular. But the next one is with regards to feedback. So I think this is really important, and having a supportive network of peers that you can send your track to for feedback. Is that something that you have at the moment? I have
that. Like I said, I do have that. And once again, I'm like, it sounds pretty good. Put it out. And I'm like, all right. And then I go back and try to touch it again.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the thing. It's the thing as well, isn't it, with friends? I think when you send it to friends, sometimes they have that, like, they can hear something, but they don't necessarily want to tell you for fear of, like, but you're not going to upset me. I'd rather you tell me if something's not right or something's standing out. But what I would say with feedback is, a lot of the time, I find this in particular, you may be getting hung up on, like, a vocal that is, you're thinking, oh man, I'm going to boost it. It needs to go up 0.5 of a dB in the chorus, but nobody, more often than not, if you send that out for feedback, no one is going to pick that up. And what is more, and I've done this as well, and I've been hung. When I did my EP last year, and there's a vocal section, and I'm like fiddling around. I'm like, 0.5 up, 0.5 down. I'm like, generally, the general public isn't going to know the difference of whether or not you've boosted it by 0.5 dB and stuff like that, man. So I think, from what I'm getting out there is, like, with that peer review, is trying to get them to be as honest as possible. And you will often find, like, if you send it to them and you don't articulate what you want feedback on, which is the way I do it, and get them just to do it unbiased, so they're not taking your opinion on, more often than not, they won't pick up on what it is that you have identified yourself. So that's sort of like the second one. It's good that you've already got that anyway. You've got that peer review going on. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good one.
So you're saying, I'm sorry, Mark. So you're saying, like, let them know specifically what to look for when I send it to them to listen to, like.
Yeah, I mean that's the way I do it. I don't generally say, or unless I really need help with a particular. I might say a frequency range. I might say, like, the low mids, or I might say the mid range, or I might say the upper mids, or something like that. But I try not to impart that unconscious bias, because if I say to the individual, I'm not happy with the snare on this, then they're going to hone in on that and maybe ignore the other features, where actually the snare's probably all right, but they might be looking for an issue that's not necessarily there. So you got to kind of weigh it up. Maybe you could send it to one person and say, I need help with this in particular, and then send it to another person and say, look, just give me some feedback in general.
I like that. I'm gonna write that down and think about that. Appreciate it.
Yeah. It's because I've done it when individuals have asked me for feedback, and I've zeroed in on a specific part, which is fine, and then I tend to ignore the greater picture, So I think that's quite important. But there is a caveat with that, I think, when you do ask for feedback, and that is, just because somebody has said something, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to act upon it. So it kind of contradicts everything I just said.
Yes.
But you do have to take it with not a pinch of salt, that's the wrong phrase, but you got to think, okay, I don't agree with that, but thank you sometimes, and don't necessarily act on it unless you not even 100%. I suppose you could try it. You can try it, and then that's the beauty of working in the box, right? We don't have to go recall large consoles. You can just recall it.
Yes.
The other bit after that, I mean, this is where it might be contradictory to what you said earlier about bringing it in-house is, and I've done this previously, is like you've done your mix 1, 2, 3, you've sent it to your peers for feedback, is then there are mix feedback services out there run by professional engineers, and they'll charge between sort of like 30 to 60 quid, whatever that equates to in dollars. And then they'll give you, like, feedback on your mix. So you could, what I generally say with that is, maybe for like 2 or 3 projects, get to that place whereby you're almost there, and then just maybe outlay 30 or 40 quid, send it to a pro mix feedback service, and just get that extra little bit of feedback. And if you do that 2 or 3 times, you'll find that not only will it improve your knowledge and your expertise of what you're doing, but you'll notice commonalities. And then you'll be able to think, okay, well, I've had 3 instances of feedback from this pro engineer, and each time they've said that there's too much going on in the low mids. So I now know that I need to address that I need to research why that's happening and how I can stop that happening and what I can do. So yeah, it's going to cost money to do it, but I think if you do it 2 or 3 times, it is a worthy investment in doing so, And
it's a fresh ear, fresh pair of ears too, which you need.
Yeah, 100%, mate, 100%. And the next tip. So far we've got knowing the fundamentals of EQ compression, and you've got your tools, knowing those really well. Mm-hmm. Feedback, and then that pro feedback. But then there's setting deadlines, and I bang on about this a lot because you mentioned it there. Like you release a track and then you go back and listen to it, and you're like, oh, I could change this, this, and this. But I think that's the beauty of music, right? If you set yourself a deadline, say you've got a track you're working on now, and you're giving yourself the month to mix it, which is quite a long time to mix a track, a month. And then at the end of that month, you're like, well, however that is, I'm going to release it. Or at the very least, like put it on SoundCloud or Bandcamp if you're not going to put it on streaming platforms. And then move on to the next one. Because I think as creatives and engineers and audio engineers, producers, let's put all in one pocket here. I mean, this could be a sweeping statement, but generally you will go back and you will find something that you're thinking, I could change that. I do it in my own stuff. I go back and I'm like, oh man, that vocal's a bit proud. That reverb or that tail's a bit long. Or I don't know, maybe that kick drum, or it's a bit bland here. There's no impact between the verse and the chorus. But if you can identify that in a previous body of work, then you know in your next one, okay, well, that was an issue in the previous track. This time I'm going to make sure that there is an obvious transition in terms of macro dynamics between the verse and the chorus, macro dynamics being the difference in loudness and volume between the sections. Yeah. Or you're like, in my last project, the vocal was too quiet. So I know in the next one, I need to really hone in and figure, okay, I need to really get my automation down and my dynamics processing down of this vocal, and maybe look at some other techniques to get in there as well. So I think deadlines are good in that, because you do need to draw a line in the sand, right, and then move on, and then not get hung up on that. And iterations in terms of mixes, what would you say? Probably calling you out on this a bit here and put you on the spot, but how many iterations are you going through at the moment? How many mix versions on average?
Wow. Okay. So my buddy of mine I work with, he was like, "What? How many?" I could say I've done for one song about 20 different versions. That's a lot. I know.
Okay, 20. I mean, it's not the most I've ever heard. So you're right there. 20. Yeah, 20's a lot, though, man.
That's
20.
A lot, man.
Yeah. It's so when you get beyond 4 or 5, what is it that you're tweaking? What is there like a particular instrument group, or is it a particular concept that you're tweaking? Is it like the time-based processing, or what is it that you're finding you're tweaking the most?
I make it hard for myself because sometimes I'm gonna go back and change the bass. I'm gonna go back and just change the drum, and then I end up just changing the entire song. I don't know why I do that.
Yeah,
but I'm working on that now. I'm getting better with that now. I'm just like, why do I go back and change everything? And then it sounds different again. It's another version of the song.
Yeah. That's tricky as well, because with the bass in particular, if you've got your mix and you've done, I don't know, like 10, 15 iterations of a mix, and then you go in and suddenly sweep and change that bass, that's going to change the whole tonal balance of your track. And then you've built all your mid-range and your upper mids and your high frequencies based on the relationship between that bass. And if you change that bass dramatically, it's going to throw everything else out of whack. It might not. I mean, it might not. You might put another bass in there. You're like, whoa, it's open. It's incredible. But for the most part, you're going to find, oh shit, I'm going to have to go right back and go from the beginning again. But it's a learning curve. And what I will say as well is, you mentioned bass, and I think from my experience chatting with other artists, producers as well, and other professionals in the industry, that seems to be the one that catches people out the most. Is bass and bass frequencies and controlling bass. It's a tough one to crack, and a lot of it comes down to, I say a lot of it, some of it does, a high percentage of it down to listening environment in terms of being able to recognize, because if you're using cans or you've got speakers, you've got monitors, unless you've got a sub, you're not going to hear those sub frequencies, and that's where you need to be using things like spectral analyzers on screen and looking at the relationship between the sum and difference between the side and the mono frequencies, and the relationship between the low end and the rest of the instruments as well, and the frequency range. One good tip in particular, if you really are struggling with it and being able to hear in those sub frequencies in particular, is to use something like tonal balance with isotope, or just a spectral analyzer, and then have a reference track and look what your reference track is doing in those lower frequencies, and then compare it to your own and see where yours lies. another key tip here, if you're going to do that, is to find a reference track. Shout out to Eric Mitchell on this one. Find a reference track in the same key as the one that you are working on, because your fundamental frequency, you'll find, will sit in a similar pocket, and you'll be able to compare apples to apples in that lower frequency range. So yeah, just throw that one out there. When he told me about that, I was just like, I don't have any idea why I've never thought of doing that before.
I'm same here. I'm like, well, okay, I never did it. Appreciate that too.
There's a really good free spectral analyzer that I downloaded recently, and I need to have a proper play with it, and that is the Tokyo Dawn Prism. I think that's what it's called. I'll send you a link to it after the episode today, just to double check I've got it right. But that looks very, very good, and it's free. And so I highly encourage checking that out. I'm going to dig into it later today and have a play around. I found it by chance when I was looking for other free plugins, and I was like, actually, this looks really good. There's some other great free plugins in there as well. If you want a dynamic EQ, the TDR Nova EQ is another really good one as well. I'll send you links to all these off air.
I appreciate it, Mark.
But yeah, FastEddy, we're coming towards the end now. So I think this is a good opportunity for you to, in fact, before we do this, what single step from today's chat do you think you will act on first? What's the first thing you'll do as a result of our discussion today?
2 reference tracks. That's about it. Maybe 3. That's about
cool.
it.
Cool, man.
20, 30, 40. That's about it.
Excellent, man. So how can our audience find you online? If they want to listen to your music or just follow you, connect with you, where should they go?
They can go to FastEddy856. Everything is FastEddy856. FastEddy856. IG, YouTube, what else? Spotify. I have beats on beatstars.com for sale. And yeah, that's it, man. I love this music. Love music.
Nice. That's good to hear. Yeah. What's life without music, man? That's what it is,
man,
you know?
What? Yes, I agree.
100%. It's the soundtrack to everything we do, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't know what life would be like without it, but that's a whole different, a whole different discussion in itself. But audience, listen, I'll put links to all of FastEddy stuff in the episode description. And if you would like to be like my friend here, FastEddy856, and become a Producer Kickstart participant, click the link in the episode description, get signed up, and come and join me on the show. And obviously, you can give yourself a shout out as well. And FastEddy856, it's been a pleasure, and I'm glad we've been able to finally speak. And I will catch up with you soon, buddy.